My name is Amy Andonian, and I am the president and CEO of Avenidas. Welcome to our housing conference. As you can see by how packed the room is today, housing is a really hot topic right now. To help answer all of your questions about housing, we've gathered a variety of speakers and sponsors together to provide you with their knowledge and experience. We thank them for their time and hope you take advantage of their being here to be curious and to ask lots of questions. I'd like to thank the City of Palo Alto and our presenting sponsor, Nancy Goldcamp of Coldwell Banker, for their generous support. We also want to thank Karen Deed for their canvas tote bags and Home Instead for the morning beverages. And we have a whole army of staff and volunteers from Avenidas who have worked for months to pull together this event today. So a huge round of applause for all the Avenidas folks that have helped make this possible. I think this is our biggest conference yet. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Don Weden. Don served as the principal planner for the comprehensive planning section of the Santa Clara County Planning Office for many years. He has long been a passionate advocate, helping local communities think through what they need to do to prepare for the challenges and changes of future growth. Please help me in welcoming Don Weden.
Good morning. Can you all hear me adequately in the back there? Okay, good. Great pleasure to be here this morning, and wow, what a turnout. It's been a little while since I've had this large an audience. And you're obviously not here for me, you're here for other reasons, but hopefully I'll add a little bit to your day. I'm told that there was enough that they could have filled the room twice over. So one of the things I want to commend you for is being proactive. You obviously got your reservations in early. And I think one of the points I want to make today is the importance of being proactive as we plan for our future. When it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people. Those who make it happen, those who let it happen, and those who wonder what happened. And clearly, by registering early and getting signed in here, you are among those who want to make it happen. So that's why you're here today, and I think you're going to find it a very useful and informative day with all of the different sessions and the different organizations and businesses that are arrayed here for you to choose from and to learn about what your choices are, because this is about choices, what decisions and what options we have. So that's why you're here. But the big question then is, well, why am I here? What am I doing today? Well, I have three reasons, and they have nothing to do with these three adorable triplets here. There just happen to be three of them. But the first thing is I want to provide you with a preview of the future. I was a planner after all, and so that's where I tend to reside in my head, is what the world will be like in a decade or so. Secondly, to talk about how land use, how the way we plan and develop our cities affect the choices that we have as we grow older, both to help us meet the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that occur as we get older. And finally, to offer some more specific suggestions about how to make our cities in general more age-friendly. I'm going to begin with an overview of some of the basic messages. The first one is, and this is perhaps no surprise to you, is that our population is aging rapidly. In less than 15 years, in fact, a little over a decade now, 1/4 of the adult population in Santa Clara County will be over 65. 1/4 of the adult population. And if you're from San Mateo County, which some of you may be, this will be 1 out of 3. San Mateo, yeah, does that get your attention? Are we heading toward a different world or what? Do we need to prepare for it? Absolutely. It obviously is going to have impacts on us both as individuals and as communities as we age. As we all know, aging presents challenges, but it also provides us with a great number of opportunities that we didn't have perhaps when we were younger. So we need to look at it both the glass half empty, glass half full sort of a thing, and we need to prepare for both the good times ahead and some of the challenges that may lie ahead as well. The good news is that there are probably more choices than ever before for age-friendly living. And it seems like there are getting to be more choices every day. That's the good news. The bad news is that there are getting to be so many that it's hard to decide, and that's one of the advantages of an event like today is you get to talk with a variety of different experts who can tell you what your choices might be, what options there are for you. So the difficulty of making it's difficult with this many choices, but again, you've come to the right place here. This is the place, unlike any other that I've seen in recent months or years, that gives you the opportunity to. I can't turn the lights out, but if anyone else can, certainly. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. The ones up front there? Okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to keep on moving ahead here just to keep the program going, but appreciate that feedback. So among the decisions many of you are facing as well, should I move? Should we stay in the house we've lived in for many years? Or should we, if we're going to move, how should we sell it? How do we determine what the price is and so on? And if we're going to stay, what do we need to do to prepare for that possibility as well? This is one major, probably among the most important decisions we make in our lives is the decisions we make about our future housing as we get older. And the good news is also that you will be getting information to help you answer those questions today from a wide variety of experts, both in the sessions and gathered around the periphery of the room here. As you make your plans for the future, I think it's important for you to realize, for all of us to realize, that the future isn't necessarily going to be exactly like the past was. In fact, in many ways, it will not be the same as the past, and we need to factor that into our plans. Shouldn't let the future catch us by surprise. So as we're making our decisions, we need to consider what are the conditions today, as well as what might the conditions be in the relatively near future. So I'm going to begin with something that's fairly, almost obvious to the point of absurdity, but we don't live on islands, obviously. We generally live in places somewhat like this, perhaps, a single-family home somewhere in a suburban neighborhood, within a city that's part of a county. And the reality is that all of those larger environments affect us more than just our individual homes. We have to, as we plan for the future, we need to factor how is the world around us going to be changing? How is our neighborhood? How is our city going to be changing? How will the county be changing? We live in a very dynamic county, obviously. So we need to take that into account. And for better or worse, the basic message I have today is that big changes are coming and we can't escape them. Okay, first trivia question. Actor. Cary Grant. All right. Movie. I knew you could do it. All right. Very good. Yeah, that was the first of the tests. Yes, good. You all passed. Thank you very much. I figured that reference would be fairly easy. The plane doesn't get him, by the way, as I recall. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Santa Clara County, and some of you are from San Mateo County, but a lot of what I'm going to be saying is just as relevant for San Mateo County. How we are evolving. And from a planning perspective, I divide Santa Clara County's growth and development history into three different eras. The first one is what I call the pre-suburban era. That was sort of roughly from the Ohlone, the time the Ohlone lived here, to the end of the Valley of Heart's Delight in the roughly 1960. Roughly 1960 began the second era of our growth and development, the suburban era. And the third one, there we go. All right. Better? All right. Good. Well, we're making progress, but a little more work on it. All right. Don't anybody go asleep on me now. This is not nap time. Okay. The third era that we are now entering, and I sort of arbitrarily put 2010 as the starting date for Santa Clara County 3.0, is the urban-suburban hybrid era, where we're going to be a little bit of both. I'll come back to that in a moment or two. But just very quickly, how we got from 1.0 to 2.0, well, basically, we started with a population in the 1950s of under 300,000 back then. Those were orchards all over the place and small towns separated by orchards and so on. But over the next 20 years, we grew by more than 1 million people. And in the process, we replaced the orchards with the homes that most of us live in today as we created this suburban landscape throughout our valley. We are now at another transition point like that you need to factor into your planning for the future, and that is that we are moving from Santa Clara County 2.0 to 3.0, the urban-suburban hybrid. And what are the things that are moving us in that direction? I'm going to cover in the next few minutes some of the forces that are bringing about these changes. Often it gets simplified down to, well, it's just those developers that are changing our cities. But in fact, there are much bigger forces than that, bigger things that impact us all, that are driving the transformation that's rapidly occurring throughout the valley. The first one is the obvious one always, is population growth. Santa Clara County now has a population of just less than 2 million people. And over the next less than 15 years now, almost just a little over a decade, we'll be adding 300,000 more people to this valley. 300,000. Put that in perspective, that's 2 more Sunnyvales. Yeah, that's up there with those one of memorable statistics, right up there with the 1/3 of our population or 1/4 of our adult population being. So, changing world. And the thing is that growth, that 300,000, is going to be primarily within the North Valley, within our existing cities. And the reason for that is the second factor is limited land supply. If you look at the geography of Santa Clara County, there aren't an awful lot of places where we could do it. I mean, we're not going to do it up in the hills. We value that as open space, and it's not really prime land for developing high density or substantial development. So largely the growth over the next 15 years is going to be within this sort of circle here from Palo Alto down to San Jose and up to Milpitas on the east side. And so another way of looking at that is this is our current population. This is what adding 300,000 more people looks like. But instead of being over at the edge or out of sight somewhere, it's going to be 300,000 more people within the existing urban fabric or suburban fabric. So that's one of the things that's going to be moving us towards a more urban future. Another one it involves land economics. It's simply that as land gets scarce, the price goes up, and the need to develop higher density and taller buildings just becomes an economic necessity. And that's been true throughout history. This is not something new. This has been land economics for centuries, possibly. Third thing driving us toward a more urban future is job growth. As no surprise to anyone here, this is a very dynamic region. Silicon Valley has led the nation often in employment and creative endeavors of all sorts, to the point that in 1 month alone, this is not typical, but 1 month alone 2 years ago, we added 6,000 jobs in 1 month. Pretty amazing. And I think we need to recognize that our local economy is important to us for a variety of reasons. For many of us who are still working, it provides the income for our households and for our businesses, but it also provides revenues to our local governments, provide the services and facilities that we want. And the reality is that jobs are people magnets. As we add jobs, as we build more buildings for jobs to take place in, that attracts more people. Another thing that's moving us toward a more urban future is the aging of the baby boom generation. Those are, I'm sure many of you are aware of that. That's the people who are currently between 54 and 72 years of age. Become an ever larger part of our population, percentage of our population. If you look at the United States, first of all, between 2000 and 2015, for every young person we added under 18, we added almost 8 seniors. 8 to 1 just in the last 20 years at a national level. So this aging thing is not a Santa Clara County or Bay Area phenomenon. It's a national, in fact, international to a large degree. But looking more closely here, talking about California, projections over the next decade, roughly, is that we'll be adding about 5 million more people to this state. Think of that as 5 more San Jose's in just about 12 years or so from now. But that growth is not going to be evenly distributed among all age categories. This is I've sort of broken down just 3 simple groupings here: under 17, 18 to 64, and 65 plus. The projections, the latest forecasts from the state are actually in 2030 there will be fewer young people under 18 in this state than there are today. At the same time, there will be about 4 million more seniors, meaning that seniors will be making up 3/4 of our population growth over the next decade or so. Very fundamental demographic change in our state and our economy and the services that we're going to need, the housing choices we're going to be looking for, and so on. Let's just play with that number for just a second. You see on the left here, the lower one about the less younger people. What if instead of losing 160,000, we just magically were able to add that? In other words, if it turns out that there are 300,000 more young people than what they're forecasting, that would still mean that for every young person, we'd be adding 24 seniors. This is a demographic juggernaut. This is something that's really moving us forward and really changing our state and our local communities very rapidly and very dramatically. And it's not driven by in-migration. This is not seniors coming in on buses from Arizona or whatever. you know, got 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 too hot in Sun City or something like that, or the air conditioner broke down. I don't know. It's not that. It's driven by the fact that many of us who are over 65 will still be around in 15 years. As well as the fact that those of us who are now 52 to 64 years of age will have migrated into that, over that 65-year-old threshold. Looking more closely at home here at Santa Clara County, this is what the forecasts look like for our county. Not quite as large a percentage in the older. Instead of 3/4, it's 2/3, which is still pretty darn dramatic. 2/3 of the projected growth in our population over the next decade will be in the senior category, 65 and plus, 65 and over. Another way of looking at that is right now, 1 out of 8 of us in 1 out of 8 residents in Santa Clara County is over 65. That will be up to 1 out of 5 within the next decade or so. And as I said earlier, that means 1 out of 4 adults will be over 65. And just to repeat the San Mateo County, it's 1 out of 3. Imagine thinking about your economy. Imagine thinking about where your workforce is going to come from. Imagine what's going to happen to senior discounts. So why does this matter? So what? We're getting older. Okay, let's sort of play devil's advocate for a moment. Why does it matter? Well, it matters obviously for many, many different reasons. But one of them is that we built this suburban fabric throughout Santa Clara County, throughout California, throughout the United States, on a number of assumptions. One of them was the assumption that we would all be able to drive forever. Maybe not. The reality is that a national survey shows that 1 out of 5 Americans over age 65 does not drive. And that percentage goes up higher as gas prices rise, or I suspect in the Bay Area as home prices, as rentals and rents go up and so on, that we cut back on driving because we simply can't afford it. But there's an interesting phenomenon I learned about a couple of years ago. We have a life expectancy. And in this case, if you are a woman in the United States on average who reaches age 70 or so and are still driving, you have another 21 years life expectancy on average. That's pretty cool. On the other hand, you have a driving expectancy of only 11 more years, meaning that in all likelihood you'll spend the last 10 years of your life as a non-driver. For men, slightly shorter life expectancy, but the same 11-year driving expectancy. So on average, if you are driving male at age 70, you will spend the last 6 years of you're likely to spend the last 6 years of your life as a non-driver. Well, to sort of make it more real and less statistical, let's take a look at this woman here. This is where she lives, a nice suburban neighborhood. Could use a few more trees, but other than that, it's a fine place to live. Let's imagine that she and her husband lived there for the last 40, 50 years. They raised their family there, but their children are now adults and have moved away and have lives of their own elsewhere. Her husband unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, and she now lives alone and for whatever reason is no longer able to drive. Nearest grocery store is a mile away. Nearest drugstore is a mile away. Her life is very different now. Her ability to stay active and engaged and independent have all been very severely handicapped now by her inability to drive in this landscape that we built that is based on being able to drive. So maybe a little over the top, but I think we might think of her as being trapped in suburbia. She's in a fine environment. It was a great place to raise their kids. Nothing wrong with the suburbs as long as you are a driver. And clearly in the future, driverless cars and ride services and so on will help deal with her situation and the challenge that many others face similar to that. But it's not a panacea. There are other things that she's missing out on in her life, even if she were able to call Lyft or Uber or whatever, or Avenidas to get a ride. That's just not as convenient as being able to get up and walk to the grocery store or do other sorts of things like that don't require an automobile. Basic point of this section is that our needs and preferences change as we age. Places that were great to raise families, places that were great to grow up in, can pose challenges and become problematic as we get older. Another factor that's moving us in Santa Clara County toward becoming more urban is the rise of the millennials. Perhaps you've heard of them. They've told you about it, I'm sure. They are the folks who were born roughly between 1980 and 2000. Means they're currently in their late teens, 20s, and 30s. Move over boomers, there are now more of them than there are boomers. The millennials outnumber boomers in this country. They are now a majority of the U.S. workforce. So as we think about the future of our communities, we need to think about not just what we want, but what do they want, and what are their preferences, and how do they fit into it? If they're the ones who are helping to keep the jobs going in our communities, that are helping to pay the taxes and so on and so forth. We've got to factor them into the equation. These are the sort of folks that Google and other high-tech companies are sort of salivate over, are constantly hiring. They have a strong, unlike their parents in most cases, they have a strong preference for living in urban areas as opposed to suburban areas. And one of the things that reflects that is they have, in terms of getting driver's licenses, they have the lowest percentage for their age group in the last 50 years. They simply don't like driving. In fact, for some of them, it's sort of a badge of honor not to have a driver's license or a car. So they're not looking to live in the suburbs, in the typical automobile sort of dependent suburbs. They'd much rather be able to live in a community where they can walk to things, where they can take public transit or have a white bus pick them up from someplace, drive them to some other place. And this is probably the last thing they want to do, is get involved in the lifestyle of having to drive in the suburbs and spend 2 hours or an hour driving to and from work every day. So this is something that is also moving us as the real estate market adjusts to their preferences, is wants to move us towards meeting their needs to have more sort of urban type lifestyle choices. Another thing, though, and I've talked about at this point, the boomers and the millennials, though they're two separate tribes. Let me sort of bring them together here for a moment. There are some things that I think they have in common in this, what I refer to as a generational convergence. If you take the landscapes that we built out in the world out here, you can break them into two generalized categories, oversimplified, but there's drivable suburban and walkable urban. And one way to think about it is, if you wake up Sunday morning and you realize you're out of milk, do you grab the car keys or do you just put your shoes on and walk to the store? Drivable suburban, walkable urban, two different sort of stereotypical choices. Clearly the millennials are overwhelmingly in favor of having walkable urban lifestyles. But what about the boomers? The boomers are the ones we built the suburbs for, actually, when they were young and needed backyards and all that kind of stuff for their play equipment. They're now rethinking, many of them, in fact, many of you in this room are probably rethinking your choices as you look forward. Where are you going to live the rest of your life? My guess is that most of you are not looking to trade up. You're not looking for more square footage, a larger yard, more maintenance, and so on and so forth. So you are looking probably to downsize, looking for something preferably in a walkable sort of a neighborhood where you can still remain active and independent and engage with the community without having to own a car. So when we add in and most of you probably, the surveys at least show that most boomers prefer to stay in their own house as long as they possibly can, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Although part of the reason that they answer that survey that way is because in most communities there is no choice. There is no walkable urban neighborhood to move to. I'll come to that in just a moment here. But so when you add in the preferences of the baby boomers, the ones that are moving, they also are moving toward wanting to find the preference toward walkable urban. So that's another thing that's moving Santa Clara County and much of the Bay Area in many ways toward a more walkable urban future. Imagine you got a letter from a couple like this, and I could imagine some of you actually writing this letter. My wife and I have lived in our single-family home for the past 40 years, but now we want to move to a neighborhood where we can continue living an active lifestyle without owning an automobile. Does your city have a neighborhood like that we can move to? Let's take the same question from some young millennials. We're the young professionals who have the skills and the knowledge that your high-tech economy depends on. We prefer to live in vibrant urban neighborhoods where we can live active lifestyles without driving a car. Does your city have a neighborhood like that we can move to? That, to me, is one of the fundamental, if you're going to have a report card for evaluating cities, is your city ready for the future? If your city cannot answer yes to that question, your city is not prepared for the future, either to meet the needs of an aging population or to meet the preferences of this large millennial population. So that's one of the forces that's going to be moving us towards becoming more urban. Another one is traffic congestion, everyone's favorite thing. But if you imagine how bad it is now let's add 300,000 more people to that. And that's a pretty scary picture, certainly for me, and I suspect for most of you. And then in addition to that, the additional people, since the Bay Area will also be growing, people who are just driving through the county and whatever from one place to another. That's just, we're not going to be able to accommodate that growth by creating more and more suburbs out at the fringe with more and more people getting in their cars to drive into the city, into their jobs in the existing area here. Whereas many years ago, actually, Lewis Mumford, a historian and city planner and so on, said, adding more highway lanes to deal with traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to cure obesity. There's actually a term for this in traffic, among traffic experts. It's called induced traffic, that the more lanes we build, the more traffic it will attract. So it's kind of a lost cause to think that we're going to be able to solve our transportation problems going forward by continuing to produce more and more automobile-dependent suburbs to accommodate our future growth. We need to find ways to move people more efficiently. And a couple images here. This is what it looks like to try and move 200 people if they're all in individual cars. This is what it would look like if they were in light rail in the upper right, on bikes in the lower right, and in 3 buses on the left there. Obviously, it takes up much less space. We can move people much more efficiently if we can make public transit of various forms work more efficiently. And the problem is that our automobile-dependent suburban landscapes just will never be cost-effective. VTA is never going to run bus lines up and down every cul-de-sac in Santa Clara County. It just doesn't pencil out. The good news is, in a way, is that transportation planning right now has more choices than ever before, but also more uncertainties. Will Uber take away ridership from VTA? Questions like that. How do these systems fit together? And here's sort of an overview of all the choices that we currently have, ranging from driverless cars to bicycling to walking to ride services, etc. All of the things on that slide there. Given that we don't yet know which of these are going to work out, and some of them haven't yet been built as to how they're going to fit into this transportation system, we are sort of a little bit blind as to what we ought to be doing with land use planning in the meantime. Well, the smartest strategy overall is to reduce our dependence on the automobile in any way we can. What, no Beatles fans here? Okay. All right. I thought that one would get a better reaction. Oh well. Note to self, take it out. The smartest strategy is to plan to provide more mobility options, more choices, in a whole different lot of ways, and I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but ultimately, the smartest strategy of all for our communities to deal with accommodating growth while minimizing future congestion is to build livable, mixed-use urban neighborhoods. That's the best way to have the least number of additional rides by automobile and adding to our congestion in the coming years. Another thing that's moving us towards becoming more urban is state housing laws. This is a fairly new development. Usually the state leaves the cities alone to do whatever they're going to do, but the problem we have with in California now is our housing crisis, and everyone's calling it a crisis now. There's really no other way to describe it. It's affecting our economy, our social well-being, and our environment. That the state has realized we can't just leave it up to local governments to do whatever they're going to do and turn down housing project after housing project and meet the needs that we have currently and the future needs of the state. So increasingly the state legislature has been both enacting and considering laws. One that was adopted just a year ago is already beginning to have impacts, and some of you may have read the newspaper the other day about Valco. Valco has been struggling for years. It's just economically not competitive the way it is today, and has gone through umpty-ump public processes. I think they're going to start calling it the Cupertino process, sort of mimicking the Palo Alto process, and to no resolution, no decision being made. Well, they are eligible, or claim they are eligible under a law that was passed last year that allows them to go in there and redevelop that site based on the existing zoning without having to go through the public process. They simply go to the zoning counter or building permit counter and pull permits for it. Because the state has said it's so critical that we build that housing rather than drag these things out forever and then they never get built, or that they could potentially do that. And the project that they put in that was described in the paper the other day, it's a mixed use, some office, some commercial, but 2,400 units of housing in there, most of it affordable housing. So over 2,000 units of housing here without going through a public review process. That's what's happening. There's more other laws in the state that are currently being considered. The point here is that we're going to become more urban either through choice, through local action, or through local inaction. If we don't become more urban responsibly, the state is going to make us become more urban one way or the other through the ways that it restricts our ability to review local projects. So to summarize, this is sort of all of the forces that are moving us towards a more urban future. Just very quickly to recap: population growth, limited land supply, land economics, job growth, aging the boomers, rise of the millennials, generational convergence, traffic congestion, and the housing laws. So bottom line on all of this, a couple bottom lines. The first one is that, like it or not, a tidal wave of change is coming toward us. Maybe not as dramatic as that, but perhaps so in some respects. We are on a course to becoming inevitably more urban. It's a bit overwhelming. We may not like it, but we can't afford to ignore it. We need to address it responsibly, because if we don't, our choices will be taken away from us. If we don't act responsibly, higher levels of government will step in. So a key question, if all of these changes are coming, is will Santa Clara County 3.0 be better or worse than 2.0? If 2.0 is what we had until roughly 2010, and 3.0 is what's evolving, will the future be better or worse? I think the first thing is it depends largely upon us. This is not something, we are not totally hopeless or helpless in this. And I think my answer to this is, can we make it better? Yes, if. If, number one, we overcome resistance to change. That doesn't mean build anything everywhere, but it means we need to recognize that not everything we can't say no to everything. We've got to decide what works for us, what will meet our current and future needs. We need to guide the winds of change rather than just being pushed around by them. We need to decide what we want our community to be, not what we don't want it to be. And most importantly, if we make our cities more age-friendly, if that's our goal in judging future development, is will this help give us more choices as an aging population, then maybe those are the kind of changes we ought to support rather than oppose. So having used the term age-friendly, what do I mean by that? Well, there are a number of organizations around the country and around the world that have their own sort of definitions. AARP has been active and has put together a livable communities program. You can find a lot of their materials online. World Health Organization has similarly created an age-friendly cities program, and I think most of the cities, all of the cities in Santa Clara County have now qualified for that. So Palo Alto is part of it. And what it does is it goes through a process to evaluate what are the needs of your community and which ones are being met currently or which ones could be provided better. It's an ongoing improvement process. It's not a final sort of you're certified, that's good for the rest of your life. It's a thing where you are constantly needing to renew and improve. So here are the categories that those two programs, that WHO and that AARP have come up with. What they think the criteria for evaluating age-friendly cities are access to services, community involvement and civic engagement, health, housing, mobility and transportation, recreation, culture, and lifelong learning, and safety and security. Now, obviously, there are a number of ways we go about meeting those needs. Some of them are provided by nonprofit organizations, such as Avenidas. Some of them are provided through public programs. Some of them are provided by private businesses. So we meet them in a whole host of ways. What we often overlook is that one of the things that cuts across all of those things is the way we plan our cities, the land use, the way we develop the patterns and how we make it either possible or impossible for people to get out and live independent lives. And there's an organization that I'll just briefly mention here that has pointed out that age-friendly cities is not just about seniors. Age-friendly cities are about meeting the needs of people of all ages. And the more we keep that in mind, the better a city is, and also the more political support we have for making changes that will benefit everyone. So we need to recognize it's not just about us. The motto of the 880s program, their title is Creating Cities for All. If everything we do in our cities is great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, then it will be great for all people. So keep that criterion in mind as you look at the future changes within your city. Will that help make life better for both people at 8 and 80? So I'm going to give you some suggestions here for creating age-friendly cities. Some of these are big ideas, some of them are small, but they all are sort of aimed at how to make Santa Clara County 3.0 even better. I'm going to begin with some prescriptions relating to our attitudes. Attitudes, then I'll talk about actions in a moment or so. The first thing, often action begins with what is our attitude. If we have the wrong attitude, we're not necessarily going to find the right solutions. The first one is we need to be realistic. Change is coming whether we like it or not. Big changes are coming, and they're coming really fast. These are not things that are going to be happening decades into the future. This is not science fiction. This is our lives over the next decade. We need to be optimistic. We need to imagine a better future. You know, many of us think, well, I've always lived in this environment here for the last 50 years. I love it the way it is. That may be a failure of our imagination if we can't imagine it being even better. Are there not problems that we have today, such as the inability of seniors who don't drive to be able to get to live active and independent lives? There are ways we can think of a better future, and we need to. We need to look at the future with optimism and with enthusiasm to some degree. We need to recognize that as we shape our cities, they also shape us. Going back to the lady I showed you earlier, who I referred to as being trapped in suburbia, there's a report that I found called Aging Americans Stranded Without Options that deals with this very phenomenon from a national perspective. This is not a local thing, this is throughout our country. And one of the statistics that popped out of me at that is that in that report is if you look at non-driving seniors and whether they get out on a given day, do they stay indoors all day, or do they get out for a walk? In higher density neighborhoods, 1 out of 3 of these non-driving seniors goes out for a walk. Put them in a suburban setting, lower density, it drops to 1 out of 17. There's just nothing of interest to walk, to see, or to do, or to accomplish by going for a walk. Whereas if you're in an urban area, you can go to the grocery store, you can walk to a library, you can walk to a senior center perhaps, depending on the things that are available. So the shape of as we've shaped our environment, it is also shaping us. And as we change our communities over the coming years, we have the ability to retrofit them to better meet our needs. Growth is, in many cases, for many people, sort of a four-letter word. We need to recognize that it's a two-edged sword. It provides both benefits and challenges for us, but we've got to look at it in a more balanced way. It's not just a negative. It's giving us the opportunity to retrofit our cities to create the sort of improvements that we want. Another thing we need to do is focus on our future needs, not just our current wants. Land use planning is, in a sense, kind of a perpetual tug of war between what we want today and what we might need in the future. And unfortunately, the loudest voices are mostly on the side of current wants, or what we don't want. What we've got to do is find a way to balance that, so that we're balancing what we want today and what we will need in the future. As a distinguished urban planner once said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find. Everybody ready? You get what you need. There you go. All right. All of you scholars of urban planning. Another thing we need to do is recognize that our well-being is dependent on the well-being of others. We are not islands unto ourselves. And sometimes to help ourselves, we need to help others. We often talk about, in just about any city in California these days, we worry about our firefighters, our police, and our teachers can't afford to live in our communities. Well, let me add to that group a list we ought to be even more concerned about in some respects, or equally concerned rather, is the health and elder care workers that we're going to need. They often make less than teachers or firemen or policemen. So if the firemen, policemen, and teachers can't afford to live in our community, these people can't either. And these are the people we may need on a daily basis at some point in our lives, either for ourselves or our loved ones. And the shortage of, and just this past week, there was this, you can't read the fine print, which is not the point of it, a 30-year-old program from Sunnyvale that has been serving seniors with in-home care services for the last 30 years has closed down because they can't find workers who can afford to live in this area. And they say, the article goes on to say that the whole industry is under stress. That if we want people to help us live our lives as we get older and help us meet our needs and help us remain independent, we need to help them. So if we are saying no to every new housing project in our community and keeping them, thereby raising prices they can't afford to live here, don't expect them to be here when we need them, if we're not there for them when they need us now. Another attitude change is we need to overcome our fear of density. It's in the suburbs, it's a very scary concept. The threats of Dentzilla tearing down all our strip malls and so on that we love so much. We need to recognize and take a more balanced perspective on this, is that density is just another tool in the city building toolkit. And like all tools, it can be used wisely or unwisely. It's our job to figure out how to use it wisely. Many of the things we say we want, the goals of our general plans, our city general plans, what do we want our city to be like in the future? We talk about affordable housing, better public transit, healthy environment, healthy local economy. Many of those things are simply unattainable without adding density. It's the critical tool for achieving housing affordability, better public transit, and so on, as we need to make the land use patterns more fit to make it feasible for people to use public transit. So basic point here is that density is an important tool in the city building toolkit. Big caveat, and I'll repeat it twice, if well planned and appropriately located. This is not density uber alles, this is density where it belongs, where it can benefit our community, where it can create a walkable neighborhood that meets the needs of seniors and people of all ages. Another point I'd like to suggest to you is give yourself some Plan B options. What if your Plan A doesn't work out? You decide, for example, that you're going to choose to stay in your current home, and due to either changes in preferences or changes in needs over time, that doesn't work out and that doesn't entirely meet your needs as well as you'd like that to. Will there be good choices in your community to turn to? And are we, with this new growth and development, we'll be using that to help enhance the choices we have. This presentation is about expanding choices, and one of the ways we can expand our choices is by creating the kinds of uses that we may need in the future. We may not want to go there now, we may not think we need it now or even want to go there, but someday that may be the thing we need. If it doesn't get built now, if it just remains on the drawing boards, doesn't get built, it won't be there when we need it. And the answer to this question of having Plan Bs available to us also relates to sort of a stereotype that many people have about us as we get older, about older adults just being opposed to change. We like it the way it was and leave us alone, darn it. Well, if in fact that's true, then Pogo may have been right. And it's not just in the environmental context, but it may be right in terms of our housing context. That the choices we need and may want in the future are the very ones we're opposing today. So we have met the enemy, and it is us. We've got to take a more balanced approach to what we like and what we dislike and what we support and what we don't in our communities. So those are some attitude changes. Let me run through a quick list here of actions to be taken. When it comes to change, we've got 4 basic choices. We can accept it, we can resist it, we can mitigate it, or we can guide it. And they all are important and under different circumstances. But by far the most important is to guide it. Where do we want it to take place? Where do we not want it to take place? And throughout most of our lives, we tend to think of suburban and urban as 2 totally different worlds. That your community is either suburban or it's urban, but there's nothing in between. We need to, in the future, think about that there is a possibility that we can have the best of both worlds. Good suburban neighborhoods and good urban neighborhoods. But it's going to require good planning. And in particular, what it means is we need to focus the urban part, the denser parts, in a limited number of places as opposed to scattering them around the community. The best of both worlds is where we focus it in a limited number of best places where it has some synergy, where there's more vibrancy and so on, as opposed to simply small amounts of it scattered here and there. And the real question is, which of these will our city be? Will we focus on creating some great urban neighborhoods, or will we simply focus on scattered density? Another quick way of saying this, is that I've been referring to for years, is we need to plan to become intelligently more urban. It's not the same thing as becoming just denser. It's becoming more urban, creating great urban neighborhoods. And that means not just looking at individual projects, but how do these all fit together? Does it create a vibrant place to be, a vibrant place to live, and so on? So livable green urban neighborhoods, all 3 of the attributes are critical. These are the building blocks for sustainable cities that benefit everyone in our community. And I'll just go quickly through you can read the titles there. Each of them has important attributes to them. But the point is that this is not some exotic futuristic idea. It's actually something we used to do before we became suburban. We had small towns and mid-sized cities in which you could live within walking distance of the grocery stores and so on. We just need to update to meet modern needs. Or another way of looking at it, we need to plan for complete age-friendly neighborhoods. Final suggestion before I have some concluding comments here is we need to eliminate the suburban lifestyle tax. And what I mean by that is, if you live in the suburbs, if we live here, chances are we have to own one of these or more of one of these. And AAA points out to us that on average in the United States, it costs about $10,000 per vehicle for us to own and maintain and provide insurance and all of that for one of these things. If you could live in a walkable neighborhood where you didn't have to own one, imagine that was like have Ed McMahon show up at your house every year with a $10,000 check. Pretty cool. That is if he were still alive. Or another way of looking at it, if you could live in a more urban sort of setting like this and not have to drive and and save that $10,000 a year, and you used it used it every day, used ride services like Uber twice a day, every day, all year long, you'd still have money left over at the end of the year. So this is an option, incidentally, not just for moving into an urban setting, but also for staying in your own house. The same option applies, potentially. So some final thoughts very quickly here. One way or another, we're going to have to get more comfortable with urban. It's coming whether we like it or not. It's a question of whether we guide it to make it benefit us or whether we just let it happen randomly, in which case it doesn't. but it's something we need to be able to talk about. Okay, movie quiz. Who's the actor? Who's there? Doris Day Rock Hudson, very good. Okay, the movie? Pillow Talk, very good. All right, no prizes today, but maybe pick up an extra brochure or two around the corner there for free. The point is we need to be able to talk about it. And as some of you may know, the two scariest words in suburbia. All right, another movie quiz. Janet Leigh, Psycho, there you go. All right, whew, good group. The two scariest words in suburbia are density and urban. Or even scarier, put them together, urban density. Whoa, freaked out. So help me with an experiment. Now this is a more obscure actor's name. Boris Karloff, that's the right one. Yeah, I don't know what movie it is, but that was Boris back in the day. Any rate, please help me with an experiment, a brief experiment here. I'd like you to say with me 3 times the word density. All right, ready? Density, density, density. Okay, now let's do the same thing with urban. Urban, urban, urban. All right, now look to your left. Look to your right. Everyone okay? What you have just helped to prove is it is not fatal for us to use the words urban or density. In fact, it's what we're going to have to do if we want to make Santa Clara County 3.0 better than 2.0. We are going to have to learn to use those words, define them for ourselves as to what they mean in the context of our individual cities and how to apply them. We also need to recognize that we're running out of time. We need to act with a sense of urgency here. The future isn't going to, I've been giving you statistics about what it'll be like in 2030. It's not as though things are going to stay the same until 2029 and suddenly bounce up. We are already on an inexorable trajectory, that's a tough word, toward a much more larger and older population. And we need to begin rapidly providing more choices, more age-friendly choices. And that means including land use within the mix of the tools we use to provide those things. We have a great number of choices today, but we need to provide even more in the future by making our cities more age-friendly. And you are the ones who can help increase our community's choices. And your own choices as well. So I say to you, seize the day and seize your future. Thank you.